And you invested, yes.
Yeah, I'll call the conference.
Hello, professors. How are you?
Very good, sir. How are you, sir?
I'm good.
How is the weather in Kingston?
I don't know what is happening. I can't hear you properly.
The techniques are going to assist. Okay. Sir.
Yes. Say that, Danny. Yes.
How is Kingston today, sir?
Professor Stanley. Say that, Danny.
Hello. I'm here to learn how to respond to that. Adupe.
I'm deliberately doing that to you so that you can learn something. And
I think you're right, because for the years I've been associated with Nigerians, I need to learn something.
Yeah. Where are you based, Prof?
Who? Me?
You, yeah.
Yes.
Makerere University.
Okay.
Yes.
I only transit through, through Uganda. I never really landed.
Oh, you never stepped on the soil. Oh,
No, he stepped on the soil.
No, the plane stepped on the soil.
No, if he transited, then he got off the plane.
No, he must have stayed in the plane.
He probably didn't cross passport control. Maybe that's what you mean.
Yeah, well, when you are in the international, you are an international,
area in the airport.
Space. Yeah, space. You don't really enter the country.
Yeah, but you are in the country.
So did you step on the soil?
Yes,
Then you arrived. If you stepped on the soil, you arrived. Your footmarks are there.
But when you transit and you don't cross immigration, you are not really,
That's a good thing for a paper, sir. For an entire project. So you are in Lagos, but you are not in Nigeria because the airport is in Lagos. Or the airport is in Entebbe, but you are not in Nigeria because you didn't cross. You didn't cross
international space.
Yeah. It's not international space. Well, it's a space of the country in which the airport is located. I mean.
No, if anything should happen to you within that space, the liability is that of the airline that carried you.
Okay.
You are not yet the property, you are not yet the responsibility of the state.
Okay.
Yeah, until you are admitted into the country.
Yeah.
You are just in transit.
Yeah. That became a matter, I think, with Edward Snowden when he was fleeing the US some years ago. And he used that actually to his advantage and got taken up by Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also happened to this guy who had, I think, plotted a coup in Trinidad and Tobago, the Muslim coup that did not succeed in Trinidad and Tobago, the guy came to Jamaica, and Jamaica made sure it did not cross immigration lines before he was returned. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we have 1 minute left. Is there a way, tech guy, that I can see the? Yes. Should I maybe log in?
Yes, you
log in on this side as well, right?
Yes.
I'll have to mute. Okay. Because I think Morgan is in already.
How did I get 3 logins? What is going on?
I have no idea, sir.
All right, let me log out and come back in.
Could you be a tripartite?
I don't think it. Please just stay in, sir. I don't think it's a problem for us. Just in case when you just avoid the eventuality that you want to come back and it becomes a bit difficult.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I'd rather you just stay in. All 3 of you.
Yes, son, there's what?
Okay, I'm logging in. Please, can you find? Is Morgan there?
Morgan's there. He came in long ago.
Oh, now it disappeared because he goes first. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for joining this session, which is session what now? Session 11B. We are in room B105 at the Faculty of Arts. Yeah, please let me mute.
Yes, just mute. Also do the machine. How do you machine?
Here.
No, yes.
This one. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you for coming to share with us in this panel. And good afternoon from Lagos to colleagues who are online. This panel is entitled Problematizing African Identities within Colonial and Decolonial Horizons. And it features 4 discussants. Agogo Akpome, University of Zululand, that's me. John Ayotunde Ishola Bewaji, University of the West Indies. Morgan Nlovu, University of Johannesburg. And Sarah Sally, Makerere University. I will quickly introduce the panelists in no particular order. I am an associate professor in the Department of English at the University of Zululand in South Africa. I worked briefly at the University of Johannesburg and University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa as well. And I was a research associate at the Center for African Studies, University of the Free State, South Africa. I've been a visiting researcher at a few universities in Europe, and my interests, my intellectual and research interests center around African thought, decolonization, narratives, migration, representations, and discourses, especially as this relates to Africa and Africans. Joining me in person here at UNILAG is Sarah Sally, a social scientist with a PhD in International Health Studies from Makerere University. Sarah is an associate professor and dean of the School of Women and Gender Studies, director of the Arua Center of Excellence in Notions of Identity at Makerere University. And by Arua, I mean the African Research Universities Alliance, whose banner stands in front of those of us here in the room. She teaches politics and the state from a gender perspective. She also teaches fundamentals of social science and health, And her interest is in highlighting gender relations in policy and practice, the effects of policy, and how policy shapes identities and citizenship. She's currently involved in several projects and is a member of the advisory board of the SIHI, a Ugandan-based social innovation hub. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you.
And the distinguished colleague that has been sharing some banter with us online is joining us from Kingston, Jamaica, is John Ayotunde Ishola Bewaji, has a PhD in philosophy, and is the first emeritus professor of philosophy at the University of the West Indies. He has a very long list of professional academic memberships and has been a former visiting research fellow at several universities, including Rhodes University in South Africa, Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, and the University of Johannesburg. He's been visiting professor at several universities as well, including UI, that's University of Ibadan, Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife. He's been a Newman Endowed Chair and visiting professor at the Philosophy of Culture at Brooklyn University, Brooklyn College in CUNY in the US. Amongst his books is Introduction to Philosophy and Logic, 2014, The Rule of Law and Governance in Indigenous Yoruba Society, 2016. And I think the most recent one is Identity Recreation in Global African Encounters, I beg your pardon, Fragmented Identities of Nigeria, 2021. He's also a fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Letters. Eka Bosa.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Our fourth panelist is Morgan Nkululeko Ndlovu, professor and NRF-rated scholar based at the University of Johannesburg. He is a transdisciplinary scholar and publishes on decolonizing knowledge and power, indigenous knowledge systems, education rights, and transformation specific to Africa. His most recent publications include Performing Indigeneity, Spectacles of Culture and Identity in Coloniality, and Marxism and Decolonization in the 21st Century. He's associate editor of Inkaiso, a journal of African thought. He's a Ford Foundation International Fellow, National Research Foundation South Africa rated scholar, a member of the International Advisory Board of the African Research University's Center of Excellence on Notions of Identity in Africa. He's currently editing a Routledge Commissioned Handbook on Decolonization. Professor Morgan Ndlovu, you are welcome, sir. Is he there? He's joining us from Pretoria in South Africa.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I call him comrade. So when I say come, sometimes I'll be speaking to him. We call each other comrade, but I'm not aware of any revolutions that we have led yet. Yet, but maybe be on the lookout. Our format is roundtable. So we're not taking presentations per se from the panelists. We're just taking a series of interventions, which I am chairing. I'd be happy to welcome interventions on the go from colleagues in the audience. But we'll first try. If there are no interventions, we'll take a first round of comments from the panelists. And then if you feel burdened to make an intervention as that goes on, please by all means indicate and proceed with your intervention. We'll keep taking these rounds until we exhaust the time given to us, or until we exhaust the knowledge that we are exploring today. But before we proceed, I'd like to just give us a quick read of the abstract so you get a sense of what we hope, what we plan to do. It's always good to say what we plan to do, because then if we don't do it, it was just a plan after all. So the production and reproduction of African identities in theory and praxis occur within what can be described as colonial and decolonial horizons. Thus, there is on one hand a sense of Africanity or Africanness produced in the wake and consciousness of Western thought traditions, and another produced in the consciousness and divergent worldviews and world sensing of more autonomous African thinking within anti, post, and decolonial horizons. In the first instance, being and becoming African is primarily influenced, we argue, and shaped by a gnosiology or knowledge system framed by the problematical classifications of human species, land masses, and waters according to Western cartographies and Anglo-European modernist forms of hierarchizing of identities. In the second instance, that is in the second horizon that we propose, being and becoming African is construed within the mold of the third nomos or norms of the earth after the rupture of the colonial horizon of modernity. In this panel, we seek to explicate the idea of being and becoming African within the framework of the inaugural moment of African entanglement in the colonial horizon of modernity, but not only that, also within the framework of the moment of disentanglement through decolonial horizons or decolonial engagements. Our purpose is not to prescribe what should be admitted into or excluded from the remit of African identity. Rather, it is an attempt to reach an enhanced realization of how our current assumptions of what Africanness or Africa is were arrived at. I think that's an important part of what we hope to do. Furthermore, we hope on the basis of such a realization to spur conversations about the implications of counter and decolonial horizons of reimagining what it means to be and or become African. That's my opening shot, colleagues. I thank you. I will now turn to Morgan for his initial intervention. Morgan, you're on.
Thank you very much, colleagues. My initial intervention begins with this question. How did the idea of African identities become so much of a contentious question? In other words, I would like to ask the question, what is it that has happened to ourselves in this virtual cycle of what appears to be a question of identity crisis? By this, I'm trying to draw your attention, and indeed our attention, to the condition of possibility in the making of African identities. I'm trying to think about the very generative environment within which we begin to raise critical questions about the emergence of what V.Y. Mudimbe described as the idea of Africa, on which the idea of African identities is steeped. But remember, colleagues, before Mudimbe produced his seminal work on the idea of Africa in 1994, he produced a foundational thesis on the invention of Africa in 1988. And my own view is that the invention theses about being and becoming African are precisely important because they point to the mechanics, systems, the processes behind the idea of being and becoming African. To me, this is more important than just attending to the content of the story about being and becoming African. And you realize that Mudimbe is not the only scholar who engaged in this idea of the invention. We have scholars like Theo Ranger on the invention of tradition in Africa. We have other scholars like Caroline Hamilton, the limits to historical invention. We also have Orionke Oyewumi, the invention of women. So you can see that the invention theses are central to the idea of African identities, but not only African identities, we have also other colonized, formerly colonized places like Latin America. We have who produced the external work on the invention of Latin America, and also see the idea of Africa being replicated in Latin America by scholars such as Walter Mignolo who wrote a seminal work on the idea of Latin America, and the others who have written the idea of Asia. So my take is that we cannot start to think about Africanity without thinking about how becoming African has been invented in history.
All right. Do you want to pause there?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm not going to attempt to repeat what has been said because I'm sure the audience is very attentive. Yes. Morgan, would you be minded to show your video? One of the colleagues actually, yes.
They want to see me.
Yes, it's Baba Bewaji. I don't think it's a request you can decline. Okay, all right. Thank you so much. But I recognize that voice. We work together in the same place. He's a personal friend. I can tell you that that's Morgan and Lobo speaking. All right. Okay, thank you so much. Our next intervention comes from Sarah. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, please shoot.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for coming to our panel. And mine is just to continue from where Morgan has stopped about the need to problematize these identities even much more. And I can begin by the experience we've had at this conference. You know, in many panels you go to, people talk about what is African. And you see this, the African way of things vis-a-vis what is colonial. And in many spaces have been actually meant to feel or to request people to say, let us not essentialize the African. So first of all, we have a problematic concept we are dealing with. But also I think the scholarship around decolonial studies demands that we unpack some of these categories and problematize them more. For example, what does it mean to be African? How do we become? And what does it mean to become African? And that is one thing we can look at. But then also, when you look at identities in Africa, what are the kind of identities that have been amplified, privileged, and used to essentialize the African? Of course, the dominant kind of category has been the issue of ethnicity. And by ethnicity, really the reference is to the tribe. And largely because from colonial studies, tribe became the way people were codified, the way they were categorized, the way they were counted, the way they were documented. To the extent that even when you look at some of the panels in this meeting, a lot of the things have been around ethnic organization, but really referring to tribal organization. And then the problematizing of that as something which is negative to democracy, which is against progress and things like that. So there's the issue of ethnicity as one of the dominant categories of identity. Of recent, we have seen the rise of religion as another thing. And again, this also is arrived at from a negative angle or a problematic angle, where you have, of course, the tradition is not even spoken about, or is spoken about as something which is relegated to something of the past. And those who hold on to it is because they have failed to progress into the future. But then you also have the new religious categories. And again, they are studied in terms of causing insecurity and how they can be agencies of peace, and really not as categories of progress. And by focusing on these kinds of categories, these become the privileged identity categories vis-a-vis the other identity categories that happen to be within us and which actually are interacting with these other categories to produce the problematic tapestry we see Africa today. For example, there are issues of gender. So how does gender sit within an African discussion on identity? Especially when people want to make you believe that the whole aspect of gender and women's empowerment is a thing which is new, therefore which is foreign to the continent. And yet a lot of historical literature shows a number of either age-based categorizations or other groupings of women within different tribes. Like in the morning, we had a presentation of the Umwada, the powerful grouping amongst the Igbo people. So you have these as historical things. And yet, such a category does not sit very well in many places as being African. We also have issues of class. And this is another kind of identity category that we tend to see as foreign. So when you're talking about African, you essentialize the tribe, you essentialize the African people without necessarily paying attention to what actually class and modern politics could be doing to those categorizations of class. Of course, the other thing we need to pay attention to is how do diasporan identities relate with continental identities? What does space and time? How do space and time intervene within a discussion of identity on the continent? And then another categorization, something we need to be aware of, are these categorizations constant? Are they fixed or are they fluid and are they changing? So if they are fluid and they are changing, how then should we understand African peoples in their different tribes, in their different ethnicities, and in their different age groups? Because now you see a category like youth is privileged against any other category around, and is, as some people would think, is simply a gimmick for marketing democracy on the continent, but it is also an important demographic, because at the end of the day, the youth are the dominant people in some of our countries. They constitute 67% of the population, so they are the majority. And if you see what is happening, for example, the youth organizing in Kenya against the finance bill, when at the beginning they were simply dismissed as a category of TikTokers and the planned kids who didn't know how the society works. So, but beyond all these things, and as we approach this, and especially since we are talking on a decolonial panel, the key question should be, or we could invite ourselves into a discussion of, therefore, how do we recenter African epistemologies within the academy like we are doing now? In the morning, we're being encouraged to be bold, to be able to theorize and not simply amplify other writings and other publications of people who were not necessarily African, but became the authorities on Africa. So how, if we are to decolonize, how do we recenter the African scholar in the scholarship on Africa? How do we recenter African knowledge systems in the study of Africa? Like I always ask, when does African philosophy become philosophy and not simply African historiography? So I would like to stop it at this, but mine is has been largely to expand on the different nuances and the different complications we arrive at when we want to study Africa. And maybe the ways to approach it is not to assume there is a one understanding of what it means to be African or a singular being of African, but to appreciate that Africa is a tapestry of very many peoples, very many geographies, and very many histories, which we can actually leverage for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Colleagues, I think the plan has changed slightly. I was hoping not to make any content intervention until the first four, I mean, apart from reading out the abstract. But I'd just like to say one or two things to, not in response to, but maybe to amplify, in a way, the initial interventions from my two colleagues so far. So I take Morgan's intervention where he foregrounds the fact that the Africa we are running on, from that very foundational, or let's say very influential text, Mondimbe's theorization of the invention of Africa, and he draws in other scholars who have examined inventionists, who have used the inventionist idea to describe what we deal with today. I think that's very crucial. There's an article, I don't remember the title, but it's written by, I think it's a Nigerian scholar, Gabriel Okpata, where he begins. I drew on that in an article I myself did, and he begins by using Foucault's understanding of discourse to unpack what inventionist discourses do. And there's a line from that I found very useful for my work, and it actually guides my thinking on many of these things. The idea that discourses are actually inventive intellectual activities. Discourses purport to present a reality, but they do not represent a reality, but they represent the invention of a reality. They purport to represent a fact by creating something that looks like what it should be. But the purpose in Akpata's deployment of Foucault's idea of discourse as inventive is that discourses seek to create an object. They seek to invent an object. But they do so while passing out as if they are producing an unmediated representation of the object. So I think that's what I get from Morgan's intervention, that rather than approaching Africa as if it's the actual object, we should not forget that this object we are engaging with was invented. And that the process of invention, he didn't use the word discursive, but he didn't use these words, but that's my understanding, is a heavily mediated process. So what we have, what we deal with, it's not so much what is there, but what is invented. But that can be complicated as well. It can be problematized. And I think here of Claude Ake's very fascinating work on ethnicity, now going to what Sarah was saying. And Claude Ake did say that whereas the literature, the history shows to a significant level of certainty that with your ethnic identities, with your tribes, Umaru Yusuf also did a lot of work on that. Mahmoud Mamdani, if you read Native, as you know, how the ethnic group, the tribe of today, was actually an invention of the colonial in the process of decolonization. And he's talking about maybe 100 years, not older than that. But Claude Ake makes a point that even though these identities are invented, doesn't make them any less real today. They may have been invented, but we can think of them as artifacts that have been invented into being. But then as artifacts, I'm not sure Ake uses that word very well in his very influential book, Democracy in Africa. So I just wanted to foreground this, and that's how I take Morgan's word. And I link it to what Sarah has said, and then she uses the words, she makes reference to identities that have been amplified and privileged, and that are used to essentialize. And these are various degrees, in my understanding, of mediation, of carrying on the activity of creating, of inventing. And I'm saying this, that we need to understand this, that which is invented, that which is created, again, we can also think of Benedict Anderson's also foundational description of the community as imagined. That which is imagined is a formulation. It's not an essence. It is something that is formulated. It is not a naturally occurring entity. It is created into existence. And that would mean that we need to address this, as Sarah has said, and I agree with her, in terms of fluidity, in terms of instability, and also in terms of a tapestry. We have to consider the categorizations. We have to think of what went into these categorizations and what went into the whole processes. As we mentioned in the abstract, the categorizations, of course, in Anglo-European modernity, there's the issue of hierarchization as well. what interests, what stimuli was these forms of hierarchizations responding to what end? Okay, I now have pleasure to inviting Professor Bewaji I'm a big fan of calling colleagues by their first names. I find it difficult to do with certain colleagues. So do not take offense, Prof, that you are the only one I'm calling Professor Bewaji for your intervention. Yes, sir.
Well, I think you are trying to make me feel like a fossil.
No.
You know, but you know, that is fine. Let me thank Dr. Apume, Professor Ndlovu, Professor Sally for putting together this wonderful panel. I will begin my remarks by revisiting what I did for UNESCO when they invited me to speak on the importance of homegrown stories. Homegrown stories in the sense that whoever tells your story gets to paint whatever tapestry he or she likes. Whether he understands you properly or not, whether he is sympathetic to your humanity or not, whoever is writing the narrative gets to determine whatever goes into the content of your description. And my argument then is that it is time that people of the continent of Africa begin to take ownership of the narratives about themselves. In this instance, it occurs to me that most of the framing of our discussions, especially within the humanities, the social sciences, even in the sciences, is still framed against the backdrop of other people's conception of reality, other people's ontologies, other people's metaphysics, and consequently epistemologies that derive from those views are also determined by other people. So my intervention would be to ask a number of questions and to offer a few comments, some of these questions, so that we can all begin to look at the issue more carefully from our own perspectives. When I saw Professor Sally, she probably could have come from my village, because there is absolutely no difference in how, you know, Africans look from any part of the world and how my people look. Even those who are albinos will still know, you know, that we are all human beings and we are all one. And the most important thing there is, how did the whole idea of African identity become important? How did it become important? Is it important to my grandmother? Is it important to Higla in Jamaica, or in Lagos, or in Ibadan, or in you know, Johannesburg, or in you know, Uganda? Is this whole thing about identity, is it important? And if it is important, to whom and why? Okay. I think that the whole picturing of what is called African is a function of what I describe as an effort, more or less, to box Africa and people of Africa into a category of weakness, a category of inferiority, a category of incompetence, and largely a category of impoverishment. And therefore, I ask, who is trying to define African identity? Definitely not the general population, not the typical Igbo market woman or a typical Swana hunter or typical Yoruba cobbler, and as such, that then becomes a challenge. Let me illustrate. Within Yoruba society, we recognize that all human beings cannot have the same tone of pigmentation. And because of that, we don't look at pigmentation to define humanity, because we know that all human beings are human in virtue of sharing in that human family. And I always suggest to people that when Yoruba people met the white folk for the first time, they actually took sympathy on them because they recognized that these were our kith and kin, our brothers and sisters who traveled hundreds of thousands of years ago. And in the process of their travails, their skin were bleached by the environment, which is their own, science about adaptation. And therefore, they didn't see any difference. They took them as human beings and they related to them as such. So what then happens is this. Would this challenge be that those of us who have been exposed to this, the foreign education, the foreign ways of life, would the whole identity problem be our problem? Could it be that we are the ones who construct those problems, just like the whole idea of Africa south of the Sahara? When people talk about Africa south of the Sahara, I just couldn't understand it. And I raised it with a very good colleague of mine, very bright fellow. I said, when you say Africa south of the Sahara, it assumes that the Sahara was always a dividing line. But the Sahara was not always a desert. It used to be lush vegetation through which people moved north and south, east and west, any direction you want, people did. And consequently, the whole thing about identity, which then boxes people into certain categories, I'm very, very weary of it. And I call it a kind of ambushed humanity. I look at it as if our humanity is being ambushed. That is, being labeled African in order for us to then be stereotyped in various ways. I ask myself, a rural European, does he or she care about being a European? Because the common thing is that he's not part of those who determine what happens in the world. He doesn't really care about those things. His own life is about existing, taking care of his responsibilities. So, to round up my intervention, a lot of the framing of the whole discussion by Professor Ndlovu is very, very, very relevant and very, very useful. And I want us to attend to those issues very, very carefully. I mean, let me illustrate before I finish. Some time ago, I suggested to a very young colleague who has just finished her PhD. I said to her that you studied conflict resolution, conflict management within a particular ethnic group. Did it occur to you the role of women in conflict prevention, conflict management, conflict avoidance, conflict mediation, and how that could be broadened into something on a continental level without necessarily looking at it as if it is within a particular ethnic group or not? Because the moment we ethnicize, the moment we label things, then it becomes problematic. But if we look at problems as human problems generally, it will help us to understand more and be able to get to grips with some of these issues in a better way. Thank you very much. I think I must have overstepped my 5 minutes intervention. Sorry about that.
Oh, thank you, sir. I don't think so. I did not. I actually did not impose time limits. I think you've done marvelously well. Colleagues, the floor is now open for interventions. It was always open anyway. So please jump in, dive in, take a shot, don't kill. Yes, sir. Please just indicate, because I will let people speak until they are interrupted, kind of. The interruption might come from me anyway. Yeah. Yes, sir. Please proceed. Just introduce yourself. And yeah. What's the institution? Okay.
All right. So my work is basically on migration and identity.
Okay.
And I got to the point that I'm trying to find the need to define the concept of identity. But not a lie, I saw that there are so many issues around migration that makes the conceptualization of identity to be somehow and then when you have to think about the Africans. Now, what actually came to my mind was to find out, because I'm not an expert on this yet, I'm still working, maybe from the point of view of panelists, that, okay, let's make it to the way I stand here.
Okay.
How do we conceptualize identity, especially given the ongoing discussion on the unity of identity itself? Identity issues in migration, arising from the globalization concepts like cosmopolitan citizenship, global citizenship, transnational citizenship, border citizenship, and most of others. So there are so many issues that competing with my own definition of identity. So I want to find out how do we define identity
in that context. How do you define identity? Maybe just put it out there. No, because you said it confuses your definition. I'm very happy to know, so that when the colleagues respond, they'll put that into context.
Okay. My own point of view on identity is what you are known for.
Okay.
Yes, to be social constructs, to be simple characteristics, or some other characteristics that are known for, and that they are identified with.
Okay.
It says now, when we are talking about Africanness, now, I think I'm going to talk because, the migration of the sea is not just something that happens within Africa, continent, it's transnational. People are now, I got the point that somebody is talking about the show, globalization and migration, and talking about that there are some people that see themselves as cosmopolitan citizens, and they don't really feel like they belong to any continent. It is whenever they find themselves that they categorize as home.
Okay.
So they don't have any sense of attachment to any continent or anywhere.
Okay.
And I remember, I think, was it not yesterday that someone was trying to, in one of the panels that we have, was trying to go, was using an experience of somebody that went to America and being a diaspora. He could not really find a place. He came back home, but by the time he got home,
he didn't feel like home. Yeah.
So he was just trying to say,
okay,
the concept of identity to be especially for the diaspora will be something that is confusing because they don't really, if they don't have that sense of attachment to their own
Okay,
country, sometimes it becomes too difficult for them to have that.
Okay, okay.
sense.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
point taken. Thank you. Is there anybody taking the point further? Anybody responding to the point before it comes to the panel? Peter, yes, please.
This is just silence what said. But my question actually is for it's about us to do.
Okay, please do what you wanted. Say what you wanted to say originally.
What ended is discussion by saying that we begin to develop individuals, and then of course we bring problems. Now, why don't we just see human beings just as human beings?
Hmm.
And I want to ask you whether it's just solid in the direction of cosmopolitanism. Now, to say that cosmopolitans don't have any advantage of their own is not correct because that cosmopolitanism is not cosmopolitanism. In other words, there is something we call rooted cosmopolitanism. People who still feel something about attachment, but they see on the other hand, identify with people all over the world. So you don't have to be rooted to be a cosmopolitan. That's the point.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Mark, and then we'll come to you, sir.
Yeah, good evening, colleagues. My name is Mark. I want to look at another dimension to I've been having this thought around it. I just shared some of them. One of our age-long institutions that I feel like the same that we need to help back to our monarchs. The weather for colonial time, they are still there. They are even getting better. For instance, from either Northern Africa, the Pharaohs are there, South Africa, King China are there, the the who confronted colonial masters, they are there. But I see a departure because of modern democracy. How are we handling them along? They are well today. Look at the Sudan of people that was in this study back under Sanusi, granted his stand study. Well, look at the former Professor those there, the cyber by professor. Name them, they are everywhere.
Okay.
So how do we harness them? How do we carry them along?
Oh, yeah.
Look at the British monarch, who interprets parliament, who without the keyboard, the parliament cannot function. I feel we should agree this. We should get our monarch along because they have serious command and control from the local behavior. When they make, in fact, their instructions are orders. So I want to trace the panel of,
Okay.
scholars to speak about that happening.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So the role of the monarchy in redefining Africa and in the context of modern democracy. Yes, sir. We'll take yours, then we'll go to the panel.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay.
My intervention is just maybe raise a few questions, then make some observations or my thoughts on what I think.
Okay.
Is African identity. I think the whole thing has to do with the encounter, the Carlos placement of historical placement of Africa. I think it is only the African man, or it is only Africans that are trying to assert or to prove who they are or what their identities are actually. And I often ask this identity, as the keynote speaker rightly said, if you were there, are multifaceted. So what kind of identity or identities are we actually talking about? You think cultural identity, political identity, we even talked of national identity. So what of the identities, which of these identities are we talking? I'm an Igala member because I was born into an Igala parent. So identity construction, identity could also be an accident of birth.
Yeah.
It could also be an issue around location. I mean, the keynote speaker talked about the position, the temporality, the location, the displacement, the disruption. So it is not as if it is fixed. It is not rigid. So it is flexible. Some are acquired as well. Some are natural. For instance, I am a black man. Wherever you see me, as I travel in Europe, I see a black man. I see a black person. I was in Germany. I mean, a whole white neighborhood for more than 3 days. I haven't come in contact with any serious person that, my spirit resonate with. Immediately I saw, black people, so even Indians to a large extent, I felt at home. I approached the person. Where are you from? You say, oh, Uganda. I'm from Uganda, or I'm from Nairobi, I'm from Niger. And there's still that bonding. So what kind of identity is being animated in this kind of encounter? Is it a cultural identity? Is it a political identity? Is it a social identity? So I think identity is layered, and at every layer, and each layer serves certain function. Right?
Yeah.
So if it comes to cultural now, as a PhD holder, there are certain times that positions might come in my village who wants to be a chief. When I retire as a professor, I say, oh, I want to become a chief.
Okay.
So you see that despite my Western orientation and all other external identities that I've acquired, I still want to have bearing with my roots.
Oh, great.
So identities exist at different layers.
Okay, layers.
But I want to also respond to you. This alluding to our glamorous political past, I will say. Ebenezer Obadare last week published a work in foreign policy. I don't know if you've seen it. Who wants an emir? You can take that online. And his argument is to say that using the scenario that is playing out in Canada, that what is actually the problem that we need to redefine in contemporary democratic setting the role of these traditional institutions. Because what they stand for is actually in real sense at variance with democratic or liberal democratic tenets.
Okay.
That was the central thesis, and I see, and I tend to see reason with that.
That's what he's saying.
Because yes, I will, in one hand, we are saying we want chiefs, we want our royal fathers, we want, and he made an allusion, drawing several work from several anthropologists to say that these institutions are not in themselves democratic, and that their certain dispositions are not, pro-democratic in nature. And so for me,
that's an interesting point. Although it can be complicated further by saying who wants a democracy. I could ask whoever said that. Who wants democracy? I'll come to you. And some of us are trying to throw Francis Fukuyama into the dustbin, actually. Yeah. But did you raise your hand up, man?
No, he had.
Okay, please go ahead, sir. Please introduce yourself. Okay.
So, understand the context in which Obadare was and the institutional context that shapes our thinking in recent times.
Please pick up a bit, sir.
Thinking in recent times, and how institutional context shapes the kind of narrative that he projects. He's situated in a very pro-liberal democracy institution.
Okay.
And so the point that you raised about who cares about liberal democracy actually is very valid. But having said that, I think what I'm saying is that I think there are points that we can connect. The first one is really that identities are very fluid. And I think that a better understanding, if we agree that there is something called African identity, or any other identity for that matter, European identity, Asian identity, the question to ask is, what do people deploy identities to achieve? If we're able to answer the question about what people deploy identity to achieve, perhaps we'll get a better understanding of how or why certain identities become prominent at some point and others, recede. And when at some other point, those identities that seem to be in recess can come forward from time to time. I'm an Igbo man. I grew up in Ife. Actually, sometimes I pinch myself to say I'm not an Ife man. You understand? And I have a very global outlook. Okay, so at different points in time, I can mobilize and deploy these different identities and consciousness for different things. The way I would magnify my identity in Ife is different from the way I will magnify my identity, in Lagos and the LSA, or in Washington, DC, or any other place. So we must understand that increasingly identities are not frozen. Identities are constantly evolving, and that people deploy identities in very plural contexts.
Yeah.
That cannot be caged by the specific locations that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I want to go now to one of the panelists.
Thank you. We'll pass this. It reminds me of Lord of the Flies. When you want to speak, you give the context. Yeah. And then they think it's innovative. I mean, like, really, it's 1954. Yeah. Yeah. I want to go to the panel and maybe indulge and ask Morgan to indulge us. Because going back to the first question, just in 1 second, can you repeat the thrust of that question? How do we define identities, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I think the colleagues have spoken to it, but I'm not sure they might have satisfied you. So I don't know if Morgan can respond in a way that might satisfy this colleague better. And you asked in the context of migration. You also asked in the context of the diaspora, which again invokes the context that other colleagues have mentioned. Like the last speaker mentioned, you are from this, you are described in this ethnic way, you are in this place, you are in that place. Before Morgan comes in, I'm very interested in what you said when you said you define identity as what people or someone are known for. I will modify it a bit and say maybe known by. So the questions I would ask, I won't give answers. So if you know me for something, does that make me that thing? What if what you know of me did not come from me? What if it came from somebody who desired to construct me in a certain way? And if it is that's how you know me, how valid is that your knowledge of me? I don't know. But I'll take it to Morgan. I think Morgan was talking about this when he said, we must remember the constructivists, the inventionist provenance of African identities, that this Africa we are dealing with was invented largely, and solid arguments produced by Mundimbe and the others he mentioned. Morgan, over to you.
Thank you very much. I didn't hear much of the questions, but I would like to start from the last gentleman who contributed at the end, because the answer for me is linked to what he said. Is there any problem with the social invention of identity? All identities are socially invented, isn't it?
Yes.
Or socially constructed. But now, when we invoke the question of colonial horizon and decolonial horizons, we are really speaking to the issues of problematic generative environment and the conditions of possibilities. And here I would like to think about identities that are determined from without, rather than those from within. Meaning that we have ideas of others about oneself and the ideas of oneself about self. So the issue with the I think it's Ngugi who put it in this way, who said we need to move from the idea of Africa to the African idea of Africa. Can you see now the power structure of coloniality by its very nature is prescriptive, and the more the identities that were were ascribed to other people were for political instrumentalism, so that they serve a particular power structure. They serve a
Excellent,
particular power structure, but the debate that is recent, that I've picked recently, is the debate about scholars who overemphasize power structures of coloniality in determining African identities, and those who are, on the other hand, are pushing for African agents. If you can, for African agents, I think Prof was talking about homegrown stories.
Yes.
What stories that we were told about ourselves? Are they serving our interests? Then I think, if I think about the idea of an immigrant, the idea of an immigrant, who is likely to be an immigrant? Why is it other people they travel across the world, they don't become immigrants? We have the descendants of European descendants in Australia who are not immigrants, but we have others, people who arrived at the same time with the others in America who are called African Americans, who are still referred about where they come from. Why not European Americans?
Yeah.
Can you see that the issue of the very issue of immigrants itself? Who is likely to be an immigrant? Who is likely not to be an immigrant? So some identities are being given. That's why maybe the issue of identity in Africa is quite contested, because we have identities that are being given to people, overdetermined from outside those people. So you find that most of the identity discourse are rejecting something and affirming something. I would like to end here so that I don't take much time.
Okay, thank you so much, Morgan. Did you get his response? Yes. So I'm trying to not overlabor the point, but it's a point that I subscribe to wholly. And it's what Professor Bewaji has also reminded us of when he said homegrown stories. But your point, I think, illuminates it very well. You said it in a very simple way, but I think it's very sophisticated if we think about it. What we know of somebody else, what we know about somebody else. And that's what Morgan is saying. People are described in a certain way. And the category of the immigrant, why are the people in Australia, why are the descendants of Europe in Australia not described as immigrants? Why are the descendants of Europe who are in Australia went to Australia right about the same time Africans went to the US? Why do we call them African Americans and we don't say European Australians, for instance? We don't, Trevor Noah, the South African TV personality, asked that question. Because in America, they also call people Native Americans. So why do you call them Native Americans? Why don't you call them Americans? I mean, nobody says somebody's a native German if he's in Frankfurt. So what he's speaking to, what is re-emphasizing for us is the constructed nature of all of this. What is pushing us to examine the power dynamics. And the other colleague made us understand why are certain identities amplified at certain times. For what purpose are identities deployed? What purposes do they serve? This is what the colleagues, I think, are forcing us to think about. I want to ask Sarah to make an intervention at this point, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for the debate. I think what has come out importantly is the whole place of space, context, and time in the definition of identities. And I want to tie it in with someone who said, why don't we just talk about human beings? Why not talk about people? So if we take identity as one's way of being, but also how others, because some identities are ascribed. So you may actually find people who just want to be human beings. But because someone is constantly ascribing for particular reasons which are not necessarily positive, then it becomes a problem. Like, for example, how can people coexist happily as neighbors, but the same people in a particular situation can actually turn onto each other and kill each other or deny. It seems to be when resources reduce, when certain matters are under contestation, people then define who should have access,
yes.
and who should not have access. And unfortunately, some identity categories like tribe become deployed and mobilized to determine who has access to a job when I'm in power and who should not have access to that job when I'm in power. Who should have access to resources, who gets exploited, who shouldn't get exploited, whose land do we grab, whose land don't we grab? So even as we say, we should just focus on people as people, we should not be blinded by the fact that even when you attempt to be good intentioned and very neutral, someone will actually sometimes abuse that neutrality for a purpose. And the key example I can give you is how the state moves onto acquiring land, for example, for development projects. The state portrays itself as an objective entity working in the interest of everybody. And I'll give an example like in my country. So we have to do development because we're a poor country and we need land to do development. And then, of course, this land gets grabbed from a community because they're a backward agrarian community with poor land holding systems. And then when it is grabbed, then the state which is supposed to do development, and remember we are under a neoliberal economic era, then this land is actually apportioned to individuals who can be internal or external to do development, and then the development doesn't occur. So the purpose I'm trying to say is that some of these identity categorizations, of course, Professor Charles encouraged us to look at why do identities get deployed? And that's the very important thing. Because while you may think you're just a human being existing as a human being, why don't we talk about human beings? Human beings are obsessed with social categorizations of a people. And as they socially categorize, they are placing people at certain levels.
Can I interrupt you a bit and ask you to come back? I just want to problematize one or two points and then maybe carry on from there. I like what you said when you said when resources reduce.
Yes.
And you are saying identities are created, are invented as part of social access control mechanisms. But Morgan is reminding us, the decolonial scholar that he is, that we must remember the particular context of colonial dominance and coloniality and how coloniality plays out in terms of identity construction. My point is this. Is it always, and so I want you to carry on from here, is it always when resources reduce? Because I think there's the history of where resources abound, yet access control continues.
Thank you.
A simple example, during COVID, some people didn't get access to vaccines. Those who had access to vaccines had many times over than they needed. They were not being deprived these vaccines by the people who didn't have, but they kept holding them back. And even the neoliberal system keeps hoarding resources where there is an excess of those resources and keep extracting resources where the people are in lack. So I want you to put this in context, but I'm trying to make us remember why Morgan is telling us to think coloniality while we carry on these thoughts. Carry on.
And I think, thank you very much. I was actually going to conclude by highlighting that we need to pay attention to the context in which these framings of identity are occurring. We need to pay attention to the context and the times in which they are emerging and arising. Scarcity could just be one of them. But also we need to remember that one of the reasons colonialism occurred was because of scarcity of resources in Europe. So they needed more raw materials. And these raw materials had to be gotten from somewhere. And the invention of race actually comes to deprive certain people of what is entirely theirs so that they can be subjugated by a person who has arrived, who is poorer and who needs to justify his superiority to organize people who have been organized for thousands of years.
Yes, yeah.
So you have that taking place. So I think that one should not be forgotten.
Oh.
And beyond that, we have to see even what happens today as an extension of the same colonial model, even if it does not have the colonialist as it is, but has ourselves. The whole things of tribal discrimination, ethnic discrimination is arriving because colonialism defined people according to tribes, allocated them, and determined who has access and who shouldn't have access.
Yes.
So even after independence, that model doesn't stop. It continues, but with the new players and with. So what we are now having in some of our countries is actually where we're talking about accumulation by dispossession. So what you're talking about is in the global north, the resources are there, but they envisage a time those resources will run out. So there's hoarding. But then we have to go and exploit someone else's resources. And as the different layers, as the capitalistic exploitation goes through different layers, a lot of identification is taking place.
Yes.
So what starts as white African, where it's coming from, maybe in Europe or in the US, by the time it arrives on the continent and they have seen our leaders, they are discussing development. And our leaders and our context with their problems, by the time they end up, it will be tribe. Whose tribal lands do we take? Who is justified to have this and who is justified not to have? So I think all those contexts matter in as much as we pay attention to identification. And that's why paying attention to the changes in the context and the changes in the times in the context is very, very important, because the aggressive nature and the oppression our people are facing today at the hands of their own is really an extension of this long project. But everybody who wants to benefit and exploit on the way creates a different identity to entitle them to do what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We want to turn quickly to Prof. Bewaji. I think
Yes,
Sarah has also spoken to something you said, and I took a note of it. I should actually get an award for note taking. I don't know who's going to give it. But you asked a question that I think it's hovering. I think the specter of that question, the ghost of that question is surrounding us. Yes, there's one online. We'll come to it. You asked the question, whose problem is this identity problem? I think that's what you said. Why does like my granny, who is now in Ogara in Delta State, although she's educated, but is she bothered? Does your aunt in Ubiaroko, does your great aunt in Ubiaroko tending a little farm, is this a problem for her? Does that 92-year-old woman in a village in Turkey, then Prof. Bewaji said, did we construct this problem? I just want him to elaborate on that a bit, taking into consideration some of the views that have been expressed, some of the questions that have been asked. Prof. Bewaji.
Yes, okay. I will start by looking at that in the context of the book by Charles Mills. And the title of the book, I think it was published in 1997. The title of the book is Blackness Visible. The first book which Charles did, of blessed memory, he died, was it last year or year before, at the Graduate Center of Cuba. The first book that he did was the Racial Contract. And the racial contract was interrogating what is known as the social contract, which I have described as a fraudulent contract. The idea which Charles was speaking to, the blackness visible, which was underlying the questions you brought back to me now, is the fact that it doesn't matter where you come from. If we do not unpack your identity, if we don't ask you to show your passport, if you don't ask what you do for a living, if you don't ask where you are from, as a Black person, the first thing that confronts people is Blackness. And that Blackness carries with it certain strictures. It carries with it certain identification, certain stereotypes. And that's the critical thing that I was trying to allude to, that when we talk about identity, at times we are formulating our humanity in the context of an environment in which we have been hedged. Let me see if I can illustrate that. If, for example, in Brazil, for example, in Jamaica, they talk about, and also in South Africa, they talk about a rainbow society. The idea of a rainbow society is a way of peppering over the layers of Blackness to make it seem as if we are being accommodated. And being accommodated means that we are giving you certain tokens because you also look human. And when we then begin to say the identity of being African is not a very simple thing. Within the context of a global environment, because of globalization, we all travel all over the place. I remember in 1995, I was a member of a team, what is known as a Citizen Ambassador Program. We had gone, about 40 of us, we had gone to Hungary. From there, we traveled to Russia. It was just after the fall of this USSR. And I remember myself, a gentleman from Kenya, and another friend from Ghana were the only three in the group. But unfortunately for me, I happened to travel on a Nigerian passport, and I was coming from Jamaica. And therefore, I inherited a double jeopardy. Nigerians are known to be fraudulent, and Jamaicans are known to be drug. They always have drug. Either it's a spliff or some other kind of drug. So usually, I'll be the last one to be treated at the immigration at any point of entry. So the first thing that accosts anybody is my Blackness. And then I went start to unpack it, which leads me to Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen published his book, I think it was 2000. And I think the title of the book is Identity and Violence. And there he described the fact that many of us, we carry with us a multiplicity of identities. And multiplicity of identities mean, at least I look like a male. I probably am a Christian or a Chrislam or whatever. Maybe I am, a professional footballer or something. Probably also I'm a father, probably a grandfather, a retiree. So I package many different identities. But when you look at the different identities, each one comes to play. Each one is deployed, depending on the circumstances. That's why I raise the question, to who is this identity important? Why is it important? What is it supposed to help us to achieve? And how do we begin to confront Blackness? The Blackness is the first thing that the non-Black sees. But within the community of Blacks, there are people who are Black who believe they are not Black. Okay? The Arabs among us in Africa believe they are superior to their brothers and sisters who are Black, you know, within the African context, simply because they see themselves first and foremost as Arabs before they see themselves as Africans. So all of these are the complications which I believe we would have to attend to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. There is is there a question online? I can't see it from my side. It's been answered. Is the colleague satisfied? And there's a comment. Please, can you read it for me? I can't see it from this side. I don't know why.
Fashiku has a question.
Yeah.
Professor Benga Fashiku.
Professor Fashiku.
Each time. There's a question there you're not reading.
Yeah, I can't see. I have to move to that laptop. Colleagues. We are.
I'm able to see charts, but I don't see any question there.
Okay. Okay, there's a comment from Ulrich Kleinenberg, my colleague in South Africa. The point of Colonial about the invention of the concept of Africa reminds you that the same may be said for the concept of Europe too. The politically sensitive thing yet put into and I agree with you. And I think all the colleagues have made that point that all identities are constructed anyway. And then Professor Fashiku from where says, each time I read some of African identity, one question that I find interesting is why does it matter? Who needs to be convinced about African identity? Whether constructed, invented, etc. Discussions of African identity are complicated because Africa is not a homogeneous entity. At the center of African identity is its utility. To which Professor Morgan responded, down goes the book Define and Rule. I think most of the African identities are produced in that type of colonial horizon. In South Africa, immigrants, I will modify the bit and say Black African immigrants are defined as Marco de Quero, a derogatory term for a particular reason, a bad one. And that's what Sarah was saying, that the reason for that ascription could be good or could be bad. We are now in the last 7 minutes of the session, and I want to invite colleagues to make comments, ask questions before we close. I want to thank all the colleagues for the comments, or you may want to respond to what has been said. For instance, I think Professor Fashiku's point is quite debatable when he says Africa is homogeneous. I think we agree that Africa is homogeneous, is heterogeneous. Europe is also heterogeneous. America is heterogeneous. Even my mother's family, your mother's family, I think is heterogeneous. So, but the question is, why does it matter? I know Prof. Bewaji has asked this question. We've tried to answer. Why are we interested in African identity? I think that question also needs to be answered. Why is it such a matter of debate? Yes, who's raising their hands? Is someone online raising their hands?
Yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
Good. It's evening here in South Africa. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Joy Joseph from Stellenbosch University. In line with identity, I need help, you know, and I liked what Professor Doaji Talk said. He had dual personality of being a Nigerian and then coming from Jamaica. My question is in line with identity. How do we theorize African theories in the curriculum of African universities? Because the African theories describe who we are. How do we begin to theorize these African theories and African theories into the curriculum in African university to make our identities to be clear? I'm asking this question quickly because I'm in African studies and African literature and gender studies. And I remember as a doctoral candidate, my professor asked me to use feminism for an African text. And the problem came from the fact that, look, you're talking about race, gender, and class. I'm talking about serious issues here. Female genital mutilation. I'm talking about GBV, violence. You know, in my country, Nigeria, where I come from, the boxing of a woman is a normal thing. A man is going to box you. And when he really boxes you and you speak, you're going to be in for trouble. You're talking about GBV, you're talking about sterility, you're talking about FGM. These are situations that describe the conditions of the African woman in the 21st century. Feminism does not describe it. So my question is, we want to bring in these theories of womanism, theories of Stiwanism, the theories that describe our own challenges as Black women. Please, we need help. How can this be incorporated? Thank you so much.
Thank you for this stirring intervention. This would be our parting conversation. And thank you for taking us in another direction. How do we translate this into the curriculum? Colleagues, the floor is yours. We'll take 2 comments, then we'll go to the panelists.
You mind if I say a couple words?
Oh, yes, but Prof, I'd like to come back to you towards the end of the session. So I'll definitely come back to you. There's a colleague in the room who wants to make a comment. Yes, go for it. Just hang on a bit. Let the conch come to you.
Okay, I'm Ike. So to add to what she said, right? Our focus mostly now is on feminism. What about masculinity? There are a whole lot of identity crises they are going through. They weren't forced to be the first sons, but they are emburdened with responsibilities. So why don't we talk about them? They go through a whole lot of things. Have we actually spoken to them? Do we give them room to voice themselves out?
They started a club, right?
I'm a member of that.
So yeah, this is also a question I would want to answer because I have an interest in masculinity. Because yes, my gender has been given a whole lot of rooms to express themselves, attention. What about the men? They go through depression. They go through, I'm from Igbo, I'm an Igbo lady. They call them Opara, right? And when they do say, Imani Opara, you know you're the first son, so you should do this. But have you asked them what they really go? And most of them, when you check it, these first sons, because they go through depression and nobody understands them, they go smoking, they go drinking, they become the Yahoo guys you talk about because they are trying to meet up the standard of not just weakness, they are family members as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you. That's absolutely a very important topic.
It's most probably something we'll carry on in the corridors, and I'm not saying that because of any biases, but there was that question in direction of the curriculum. And in regard to African identities more broadly, I know what you are saying is a subset. I assume you are talking about masculinity amongst Africans. I like the Igbo example you gave. But maybe let's start the conversations in the room by suggestions in response to that previous commentator from the colleague from Stellenbosch in terms of how do we take this into the university curriculum. Professor Osimiri, I see your hand is up. Okay, you put the question in the mix, but I really do want, can you hang on to the question a bit? We'll move it to the end of the, just before. Anybody taking on that, then we can go to Professor Bewaji. There are 3 people taking on it. Yeah, we have 3 minutes. Okay, so we'll take your question into the corridor conferencing. Peter, we'll take your question in the corridor, that's corridor conferencing, but we'll give the remaining 2 minutes to Professor Bewaji. He was going to make a direct response. You want to? Yes. Okay, we'll give first to Sarah, 1 minute to Sarah, and 90 seconds to Prof. Bewaji on the question of the curriculum.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. Yeah, thank you very much. I think one of the things we need to be aware of is not carrying the white man's burdens. The white man has theorized Africa in a particular way, written about Africa in a particular way, and most of us scholars want to hold on to that. And we are spending time to, even goes with the whole issue of masculinities. How were African societies organized before colonialism? It was not this super hierarchical level of man must provide. And what you're seeing today around male anxieties and male depression is not because of gender empowerment. It's because men are holding on to the singular role of being a provider. It's a capitalistic invention of things. The economy has changed. So times have changed. We have to change with the times. You're not going to remain the superior Igbo man in a context where provisioning for you singular is a problem. So in our university, we actually do masculinity studies, we do men studies, male identities. There are whole disciplines around this. So it's not just to blame women for what they are doing, but basically what we are saying is let us stop being the carriers of the white man burden or conceptualize as Africa like this. We must be like that. I think as Africans and being located in Nigeria today, where we have been encouraged throughout to be bold and to theorize, let us dig back through writings like of Sabelo Ndulov about the epistemicide. What were the African knowledge systems? How do we bring them back into the academy? As opposed to trying to make Africa the place of applying white man's knowledge.
Thank you very much. Final word to Professor Bewaji. You've got like...
well, I think, thank you, Professor Sally. You have, captured part of what I wanted to say. And what I wanted to say is that we all have the responsibility of thinking outside of what the anthropologists, the social sciences, the humanities gave us. And some universities are making the effort. Professor Ndlovu knows about the African Node for Thought in University of Zululand. The resistance to properly studying our indigenous cultures, indigenous knowledge systems, indigenous ways of life is because our curriculum were handed down to us, and many of our colleagues, especially senior colleagues, can't think of a different way of doing most of the things we are trying to do. And when you make suggestions, you meet a brick wall, sort of. Just as an anecdote, it seems what Professor Sally had said here is very, very true. In Yoruba society, in the community in which I grew up, if a man were to as much as lift his hand to beat his wife, he is made to pay. He is made to offer sacrifices. I never saw my parents in that kind of relationship. I know that it does happen and all that, but I don't think that, this could be generalized to all African societies. And consequently, it is the responsibility of our colleagues, especially those who have the leverages. For example, if you go to NUC and you say you want to develop any new program, they staunch it. They make sure that it will not see the light of the day. These are the challenges we all face. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Bewaji. Do I have 30 seconds for Prof. Ndlovu? Prof. Ndlovu, 30 seconds, curriculum.
Yes, I think I can just add the issue of, I think is the sister from Stellenbosch, because the issue is about which archive do you tap in order to understand a particular situation. I think systems of knowledge, they produce a particular reality. So to understand what is happening there, I think you need to tap into a particular archive, because you will never, Africans have been writing, but sometimes you find that what they have been writing is not even considered a theory. So it is up to you to discover the theories that Africans have been using to characterize a particular situation. I think, I think I have to end here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
There is a problem of misdiagnosis. You can misdiagnose a situation sometimes if you tap into the wrong Rome
Yeah.
archive.
Thank you so much. Professor Morgan Nlobu in Pretoria, Professor Tunde Bewaji in Kingston, Professor Sarah Sali from Kampala, but in Lagos, and me in Lagos. To all of you, thank you for being part of this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's take out.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. It worked out. I should say so.
Yeah. Oh, okay.